Hi there, my name is Charlotte, and this podcast is about understanding literacy books for GCSEs and how teachers can support their students to read the books and then pass their exams with them. So, first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what GCSEs are and what the Department for Education says about English literature in particular. The subject content and assessment objectives that they want all students to achieve at the end of 2 years for English literature. I'll also talk about why teachers pick certain types of books for their students and how they can help to prepare them for their exams. If you haven't heard any of my podcasts before, my name is Charlotte. I have experience working in a nursery school from the ages of 0 to 4, and I now work in a primary school as a Year 2 teacher in London. So because I work in a primary school and I've had experience in a nursery, I haven't had much experience in a secondary school, apart from when I was in secondary school, which was quite a while ago. But I still also, I remember studying for my own GCSE exams and all the stress that brought me. It was a while ago, but yeah, I still remember those days. So first of all, first part of the podcast, I'm just going to talk about what are GCSEs and why do we have to do them? So I'm sure you hear the acronym all the time in the news, media. If you're at school now, you'll definitely be hearing about them. They sound really scary and they do make a big deal. It's basically getting results, and then schools are ranked by their results from their students' grades, which they can usually achieve between grades A star to, I think, E or F, essentially. So what does GCSE actually stand for? It stands for the General Certificate of Secondary Education, GCSE. And it's taken by students when they're at the age of 14 to 16. So you do spend 2 years studying lots of different subjects, and you prepare to be tested on your knowledge of all of these different subjects, basically. On the UK government website, they list all the GCSE subjects that are available, and it's quite an extensive list. From what I can gather, they've had lots of subjects added on since 2015. So they've got subjects from 2015 to 2025. Now, I guess a few of the more known subjects are your basics or your core subjects like mathematics, English language and English literature, and science. You could have combined science, which is like physics or chemistry and biology all together, or you can do it single. I guess it means that you could just take one type of science, which actually, when I was going to school a long time ago, they actually made you do all three. So you had to do physics and chemistry and biology. It was non-compliance. It was compliant, sorry. You had to do it. I also saw lots of new subjects that's been added. Some of them maybe not so known ones. So they are ancient languages, citizenship studies, ancient history, astronomy, which I find really weird to have as a GCSE, classical civilization, electronics, engineering, geology, and statistics. And from 2025, they're going to be adding in British Sign Language as well. So after spending 2 years learning, I think about 10 of these subjects, you finally get to do your exams, and you either get a grade between A to E or A to F. If you're lucky enough to finish your GCSEs and get some good grades, then you can then take it through to the A levels, which is the advanced level of the GCSEs. A levels literally mean advanced level of the GCSEs, which is the General Certificate of Secondary Education. So you get advanced levels of the General Certificate of Secondary Education, basically. And I remember, I think I had to do 4 subjects or 5 subjects when I was doing my A-levels. And A-levels are just a way so you can choose your subjects to look into further and more in depth. And it's basically a way of helping you to plan for your future. So you study the subjects, you do learn more about it, you do your A-levels, hopefully you pass them, get good grades, and then you're allowed to go to university, and you can study your subject that you want to learn way more about, and you spend another 3 or 4 years studying that subject. And then you can use your knowledge of what you've gained to essentially just get a job in the real world. So you do all that studying for a reason, and you learn all that knowledge and stuff, fill your head with all the good stuff, all the good knowledge. And then when you get to the real world, you can impress your new employers with what you know and help them to, just get on with it and become better at your job and do great stuff in the world. So this podcast is about English literature. So there's probably been times when many kids at school are wondering, what on earth is going on? Why am I learning about William Shakespeare? And his stories are so old, they make no sense to me. I can't even understand them. They use really old English. What is going on? So I've had a look into it. So don't be quick to blame the teachers and just say, oh, my teacher's so awful. They're making me learn this stuff and I don't need to know it. They're actually been given this information by the UK government. Hello, UK government. They hide in the background while the teachers are the ones getting the blame. The UK government website, www.gov.uk, has documents which gives the subject content and assessment objectives for English language and literature. And not just English, they do it for all the subjects, every subject that is taught throughout the school. And basically they set the content and they set the objectives for those subjects. Let me read you a little bit about the English literature document. It's the subject aims and learning outcomes state that GCSE specifications in English literature should develop knowledge and skills in reading, writing, and critical thinking. Through literature, students have a chance to develop culturally and acquire knowledge of the best that has been thought and written. It also says that English literature should enable students to read a wide range of classic literature fluently and with good understanding, and make connections across their reading. They should also appreciate the depth and power of the English literature or the English literary heritage. Let me say that again. Students should appreciate the depth and power of the English literary heritage. So it's learning. That's why we're learning that's why we're reading books from the past. It's our heritage, learning about English language. And a third point that I picked up, which I thought was quite relevant, students should acquire and use a wide vocabulary, including the grammatical terminology and other literary and linguistic terms that they need to criticize and analyze what they have read. In the document, there's a section called the scope of study, and it states that they require students to study the following content: at least one play by Shakespeare, at least one 19th century novel, a selection of poetry since 1789, including representative romantic poetry, and a fiction or drama from the British Isles from 1914 onwards. All works should have been originally written in English. So the scope of study section of the document gives the teachers the criteria that their books need to meet in order for them to be able to teach it to the students. If the book isn't one of these points, then the teacher can't really use them. Or if the teacher wants to use a different book, they need to give a good enough reason why to the government and probably to Ofsted to explain why they've moved away from the government outline and why they're not following basically what the government's asked them to do. So teachers do their best to follow the rules as much as they can, and they pick the books from the set texts And I also found a list, let me see, just to name a few of the set texts that they are given. It's quite a long list, actually, of different styles of books. So I'm just going to read 6 of them. I picked them from the different areas. So they could choose A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens to read with the kids or the students, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Romeo and Juliet, or Twelfth Night or even Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. They could pick from that. There are other books, of course, from this list. You don't have to pick just these ones. These are just a few. An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley is another book that they could choose to read. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And as I said, there were many, many more titles from that list. But it's quite a long list, so teachers have to be really careful to find a book, first of all, that's in that list, and one that's relevant, and one that has good features in it as well. So I think teachers have their work pretty cut out for them. They have to figure all this out before they even start teaching from September onwards. So they spend their summer probably looking through books, looking at previous books that they may have done in the past or what the school has done previously. And, if they want to pick a new book, they have to then read that book themselves and then figure out how to plan for the kids, for the students to learn it and to get to grips with it. So this brings me on to the last part of my podcast, really, which is how can teachers support their students to understand the books and answer the GCSE exam questions. As I'm going to say, I'm going to tell you again, just to remind you, I'm not a secondary school teacher. I'm not sure what practices are in place at the moment in schools. So I'm just going to outline my own thoughts and my own ideas, basically. And this is kind of what I think teachers could use. It doesn't mean that they must do them. It's just a few ways, or strategies that they could use to get their students to read and understand books and answer exam questions on them. So when the school year starts, it's September, the teachers have already chosen the books that they want to go through with the kids. They spent their summer, their month of August, looking at books available, and they pick the ones that they need. Then they spend some time making plans on how they can get through the book with the students, like what questions do they want the students to think about? What issues might arise, such as the language and the words in the text that could be alien to the students, and they won't have a clue what they mean. So they have to go through them and explain it. So the teacher then basically has to read through the books, understand it themselves, and then figure out a way to explain it to the kids. They might even decide to, first of all, at the beginning of the term, read a few pages, try and understand it, and then get the students to do the same. Spend a week or two just talking about the language that's been used and the words that's in the book. So the students can just basically learn what the book's about, understand the story, and what words the author has written and why, basically. Then they might move on to analysing the language using the text. They might look at similarities and differences between authors from the past, so that particular author, and authors in the present. So they might have to compare and contrast this book with, say, something from this century. Mallory Blackman is a good author. She's written a few good books. If they're very relevant, then, they might find a book to look at and compare from Shakespeare versus Mallory Blackman, or Shakespeare versus another famous author. As I said, I'm not too sure what books are being read in secondary school, but I'm sure there's quite a lot of different authors around for this. And then, they basically look at a well-known book now, and they look at the book from the past, and then they can compare maybe a few pages and get the kids to see what's similar, see what's different. Like they could have similar themes. Like William Shakespeare's well known for his romance, tragic, sad drama, and like war. And, you could definitely find a book today about romance and drama maybe it doesn't have war in it or fighting, but it has the romance and drama. And you can see the kind of relationships that in the past people still had to have relationships with each other. They still had to get through their differences with each other. They just did it in a different way. And Shakespeare had the flair for the dramatic. So it's and then it's easy. It's a bit easier for them to then, for the students and the teacher to then say, okay, what's similar about the William Shakespeare story here and the similarities and differences to this story here, basically. So that's one kind of thing they could do. And they could spend 2 weeks on that, or they could spend a week going through the text and working that out. And it's just a way so the students can actually fully understand the differences and the similarities. And they might analyzing the language as well. So again, it's looking at words and phrases. So they look at the words that Shakespeare used, you look at the phrases that he used, and then they find the similar kind of words and phrases in the story that's been written now, in the 20th century, and this might include some culture references, because teachers will then have to talk about what it was like in the past, or what it was like back in the day, before people had cars and before people had technology. People wrote letters to each other. People had to settle their differences there and then. They couldn't just walk out and text them later or give them a phone call. No, people sorted out their issues in the house or on the streets, or they were in castles having fights and battles and all that kind of thing. And nowadays, if you got in a fight with someone, you could just leave them and then call them later on during the day once you've calmed down and say, I'm sorry, and give all your excuses and apologies and things like that. There was no way that you would have a fight on the street unless, you really were in the moment. So, getting back to my podcast, if the book has been lucky enough to be adapted to a movie, Shakespeare's stories, quite a few of them have been created into a movie adaptation or redone, like Romeo and Juliet for sure. And there's also the 12th Night story that was updated in the 90s. I think they did a 90s version of the 12th Night. So the teacher could also find those clips, those videos, and they could show the children or show the students clips, and then they analyze what's happening in this part of the movie and how the actor's portraying certain parts of the story. If they're really, really lucky, then the teacher could organize a school trip and take the students to watch a theatre show. William Shakespeare's theatre shows are still going. They're live. You can go and watch them. So, they could take them to actually go and see a real life version of the story that they've just spent the whole term talking about and reading about, which would be pretty nice, actually, as a nice thing. If all else fails, the teacher could just do some drama lessons with the kids and the students and get them to act out the story. They could use the same language from the book. And if that doesn't work, they could ask the students to change the language and say, okay, take this part of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and rewrite it in your modern day language. What would you say? How would you change the words from the Julius Caesar's William's text and put it into your own language? And then you can say, right, you guys are going to play the characters. We're going to use this version, the up-to-date version, and you're going to act it out. Use the language, use the words. And I think that's quite nice. It's like a role play sort of thing. And the students can then really understand what characters are thinking and feeling. I think when you act out the story, you get a much better sense of what's happening, why it's happening, and you get the thoughts and feelings of the characters. And I think that's actually quite a nice way to get the students to really understand and get to grips with what they're reading. So after all of this, and the students have an idea of the story and they can understand the words and phrases, then they can be given example GCSE questions. and the teacher can then model ways of answering them. If they find the students are still struggling, the teachers just go back a step, review the text, review the modeling, redo the models, show new ways on how to answer the questions that they found difficult, and tackle things in a different way. Try again. I think these kind of strategies, as I said, I'm not a secondary teacher at the moment, so I don't know what they're doing, and they could be doing different things. They could be doing similar things to what I've just said as well. And it's all these ways can help the students definitely to find it, answering those tricky exam questions a bit easier. Just make it a bit easier for them, especially if they're looking at a question to analyze a text. Why has he used this word? Why has he used this phrase? And then they have to write like a 2-page essay about why William Shakespeare has used the word ragamuffin or something, or why he's used the word scoundrel for this character at this point in the play, So, well, that's it from me. I do hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have any comments, leave them down below. As always, I'm going to be making some more podcasts in the future, so do listen out for them. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.